You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Friday, doing an interview here with Paul Thigpen on his book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith. Subtitle, Are We Alone in the Universe with God and the Angels? By the way, there is a link to it available. It's published by TAN, so you could just go to the link in the show notes and order a copy there. Here's my copy, although the one that you'll purchase will have a different cover. Welcome to the show, Paul. How are you?
Yeah,
that's going to be
there's
one.
The cover. Yeah. I helped design that cover. I like it. Yeah. Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
This is an exciting topic. I look forward to this. So why don't you maybe just start out with just some basics here? You know, you address this in the book, and I imagine there's a lot of people that are going to wonder this as well. What difference does it make if there are extraterrestrials who are intelligent, ETIs for short in the book? What difference does it make if they exist or not?
That's a great question. First, I would say if they show up, it's going to make a big difference, right?
Right. Practically.
If they ever finally get to the place and they've landed on the White House lawn or whatever, it'll make a big difference. But the other thing is that this is in many ways a book of Catholic apologetics. That's the kind of work I've done for years. Because what you find is that for centuries, you've had certain adversaries of the Christian faith who have claimed that if extraterrestrial intelligence, we call it ETI, exists, then it somehow disproves the Christian faith. And so really the purpose of the book, the thesis of the book is that no, even if you hold on to a robust, traditional, Orthodox Catholic faith, that that faith can accommodate, if we should discover that such things exist, can accommodate that. It would not undermine our faith. It would not disprove it in any way. And so we don't have anything to fear from those who are seeking to try to discover that thing right now.
Yeah, fair enough. And so one thing that you address at length in the book is the history really behind the question. I mean, you go back all the way to antiquity, philosophers, Aristotle, and figures like that, and survey different views on extraterrestrial intelligence from them pretty much unto the present, which is pretty fascinating. By the way, I said president there by mistake, but it actually is a happy mistake because you also talk about some of the presidents, which we'll address here in a moment, some of their views on ETIs. Can you give us a history of the question and the conversation? I know it's pretty long survey, but if we can, just give us a summary of it.
Yeah, let me see if I can overview. We're talking about amazingly 25 centuries.
Right.
A lot of people today have been in a climate that can actually be historically explained of dismissing this idea, thinking it's not serious. Why should you even talk about it? But the truth is, we're the anomaly historically. These last couple of generations, it's connected to certain things that went on with the Pentagon and the government, have been led to think it's not a serious question. But for 25 centuries, 2,500 years, all the way through the history of the church, all the way 500 years before the Greek and some Roman writers, the issue has been taken very seriously by some of the best minds of Western civilization. And so I think it was Saint Anselm who said, this is a marvelous question about whether God has created multiple worlds. Something we'll look into. And I think that's the attitude we need to have. For him, it's just a matter of curiosity and of knowing more about what God has done. And I might add to that, first answer I gave to your first question. One of the reasons why we make a difference is it would show us at a whole new level God's creativity and his omnipotence and his wisdom, omniscience. Be pretty amazing. But try to make it short with the Greek and Roman philosophers that looked at this. You had kind of two camps. One represented by Democritus, who was called an atomist. He kind of was one of the early proponents that we actually have things we now call atoms. But he thought that the universe was infinite and that any potential reality actually is reality, that every potentiality becomes an actuality in that infinity. And so, of course, there are multiple worlds, and there are worlds that have intelligent life on them as well. The other major tradition, kind of represented by Plato and then his disciple Aristotle, I think, developed it the most, involved the notion that, well, first of all, we talk about the word cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
In Greek, it just means world, and it can mean this planet.
Mm-hmm.
It can mean the world of human activity, or it can mean the whole universe. It can have other meanings. His notion was that you've got one unmoved mover, one prime cause, a first cause of everything. And although he believed that so-called like a creator, but not really like the Hebrew creator, he didn't create everything out of nothing, but he took the existing material that had been there all along and created something out of it. That it would be more perfect to have only one universe instead of several. And if you understand his philosophy, you can kind of get what he's trying to get at. But I think it's important for us to recognize that that's a philosophy that, it's more Aristotle than it is Job, from the Bible. That, but even so, his thought had lots of influence on the early church and all the way through the Middle Ages, where there was not just Christians, but people in the West in general just kind of assumed that science was correct. He said there are four elements: air, earth, and water. Earth is the heaviest, so everything in the universe falls down to the central point, which is the earth. So there's nothing actually. We're the center, and there's nothing in now. Even in that tradition, and you see this raised as a possibility by Aquinas, who of course followed Aristotle in so many ways, that this possibility that the stars were themselves animate, that they were alive and intelligent and moved, kind of under their own will, which, if you think about it, is basically a form of extraterrestrial intelligence, just not the kind we think about on planets. So it was more the science that dominated the West that would keep people from accepting the possibility of more of life out there, because they thought the Earth was kind of the center of everything. But even then, you have certain voices that say, "Oh no, there could be life otherwise." You had entire debates about whether there's life on the moon, for instance, and that kind of thing. But finally, in the Renaissance period, and then on with the Enlightenment, you begin to have people, especially once the telescopes develop, to realize that so much of the science, Aristotle had said, it wasn't true at all, and that for sure the Earth was not the center of the universe. And even though Copernicus, others thought the sun was the center and the Earth goes around it, that much is true. But the sun's not the center of the universe either. So it began to open up all kinds of other possibilities. If Aristotle was wrong about the science, what else could there be out there? So you get lots of lively debates starting in the 1600s, 1700s, and there were always Catholics, especially, but also Christians involved in those discussions. By the late 1800s, the late 19th century, according to St. John Cardinal Newman, the intelligentsia of the day, including the theologians, he said that there is such a consensus on, yes, there is ETI, that it's considered blasphemy not to believe that. And so you look at that and you say, how did that get to be? It was only a century ago. Why is it so different now? We could go into the historical reasons for that, that have to do with all kinds of things starting in the 1940s. But the point is that religious thinkers, and especially Catholics, have debated this for centuries. You have periods when it's not too many people think that they exist, and then other periods where kind of everybody thinks they exist almost, with only a few objections. And so it's not a crazy thing for us to talk about at all.
No, certainly not. It's also quite fascinating. Now, you address some of the skeptics. I mean, you mentioned a few there already, but who are some additional skeptics that you encountered in your survey of the history here? People who didn't believe in ETS.
Oh, I see. I thought you were going to say skeptics of the Christian faith.
You could talk about those too.
Okay. I mean, you just had occasional lone voices, or you even had someone like John Wesley, who was the founder of the Methodist movement, eventually the Methodist denomination, that first accepted it and then kind of backed off. You had people who began to, I could give you the reasoning more than the individual names, but a lot of them are kind of tucked away in the book. But the reason with humanity and if there were other intelligent races, that would somehow minimize that special relationship. And you have others who say, well, it's not in the Bible, so it can't be. Even had skeptics of the faith, Christian faith, who believed in it, said ETI exists, and because it's not in the Bible, it disproves your faith. You had others that just really wild ideas. I mean, Benjamin Franklin was one.
Yeah.
He seems like such a staid kind of, conservative thinker in so many ways, but toward the end of his life, he developed this wild notion that there were multiple gods, and each one had an intelligent race that it kind of ruled over, and that behind them all was the ultimate God. And he said, well, I worship just the ultimate God. So basically he was a polytheist, kind of an astral polytheist. Most people think
Sounds
about
almost
Franklin.
like Mormonism before Mormonism.
In certain ways, yeah. And of course you had, those kinds of things too. Some of the Adventists, Seventh-day Adventists, and with Ellen White and other folks that had it.
Yeah.
But you certainly, more recently in the 21st century, so much more has been discovered that scientifically, that seems to open those doors there. When Darwin came along, there were skeptics who were Darwinians who said, look, the conditions on Earth that allowed human life as it is and intelligence to develop are so specialized that it's probably unlikely that it's anywhere else in the universe. But then, and through the 60s, that kind of held sway. But you have scientists that talk about that period and say, but then, people began looking at other things like, no, life is a cosmic imperative. One of them said it's likely that it's happened all kinds of places. Once we realized began to realize how many stars are there, how many planets. It wasn't until the 1990s that we actually could confirm the existence of what we call exoplanets, planets outside the solar system. But now that we have, a sense of what kind of conditions would be necessary for them to be inhabitable by life like ours, oh my goodness, it goes to the millions, maybe billions or more. So even from a scientific point of view, for most scientists, I think today, oh yeah, it's almost certain.
And not only that, I mean, given how large the universe is, but also people will say that there are multiverses. I'm sure that factors in as well. How relevant is the multiverse theory to the existence of ETI in these discussions?
Well, it takes a whole new, everything to a whole new level, because you're talking about possibility of ETI in multiple universes. You also have the folks with the interdimensional theories that they're actually dimensions that are right next to each other, even interpenetrate each other, that sometimes get crossed from one to the other. Yeah. Which sometimes that kind of language almost seems to be describing the way Christians speak of angels. That, they don't have space, they don't occupy space, and they don't have motion within a universe. So I don't know what to make of all that. A lot of the things I'm discovering is a lot of the secular folks writing about this kind of stuff and thinking about, especially about UFOs. I do have an appendix about that. That it's like they're rediscovering what Christians have known all along in certain ways, that materialism, the philosophy that only matter and energy exist, doesn't fit what we know. And the more they go into quantum theory and other things, the more they begin to say, oh my gosh, there's something else going on here. There's maybe a field of consciousness that underlies all reality, and say, well, maybe you're talking about God, huh? Or they talk about how a particle in quantum theory, a particle could locate in two places at once. So you say, hey guys, we know about saints who their entire bodies were located, entire saint was located in more than one place at once. It's not the same thing, but we already have within the Christian understanding of reality concepts that some of them are finally kind of groping to get back to. Oh my gosh, there are things beyond matter and energy, as we know it, things beyond the possibility of what we would call miracles. They might have another name for it, but the physics and laws of physics as we know it, there might be things that go beyond that.
Yeah, I heard that Einstein, I don't know what it was called, but he picked up on the fact that you could have two particles that were somehow originally related, but then separated in completely different, parts of the universe, and they would still be able to interact with each other. Yeah. There's just no way to really account for it.
Spooky action at a distance, I think that came to be called. Yeah. And that's part. It's just an interesting thing. That's one reason why I'm trying really hard to also help non-Christians to think about these things. That I think if they look at the data that we have, it could break them out of, if they have it, a materialist worldview. It's all matter and energy. There's no God, there are no angels, there's no other dimension that we might call heaven. And to see there's, what Christians have known all along. There are things that seem to defy the laws of physics, what we call miracles. There are creatures who are not bound by space-time the way we are. And that's a good thing. It's an opening into their minds to say, okay, let me start thinking beyond what I've always thought was true.
Yeah, there's more to it than we realize. Tell me about some of the popes on ETIs. What have they said on this topic?
Well, you get Paul VI, a comment recorded where he's open to it. Someone's talking to him about it. The most powerful one to me comes from St. John Paul II. He was in a public audience in the church in Rome, and a young girl asked him, "Holy Father, what about the aliens?" Now, he could have answered a lot of ways. He could have said, "No, our faith, tells us that can't be true." He could have said, "We don't know." He could have said, "Well, if they exist, then," and make a comment. But he didn't say anything. And they're God's children too. Given what he could have said, that sounds to me like an affirmation. He believed they are, and they're God's children too. But even, in addition to popes that I mentioned in the book, oh my goodness, Padre Pio, St. Pio.
Yeah,
amazing thing. Let me just read real quick.
Yeah, please do.
What he said. This is recorded. It's in the Capuchin records, records of his order.
Sure.
And what he recorded, it was recorded for him to say in a dialogue. And this is Padre Pio. It's not just the guy on the street,
Sure.
So someone asking the question, Father Pio, some claim that they're creatures of God on other planets too. His answer, what else? Do you think they don't exist and that God's omnipotence is limited to this small planet Earth? What else? Do you think there are no other beings who love the Lord? Then the question again, next question, Father, I think the Earth is nothing compared to other planets and stars. And he answers, exactly yes. And we earthlings are nothing too. The Lord certainly did not limit his glory to this small Earth. And then listen to this. On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we did. Now, because he said it doesn't make it gospel, of course. We all know that even if someone's a canonized saint. But two important things. One is that it shows that a faithful Orthodox Catholic can believe in all that and believe in the existence of ETI and it's not contradicting his faith. And we'll find out about a lot of folks. So for instance, John Paul II, but lots of others. But then the other thing is, with that particular historical figure, St. Pio was known to have access by divine gifts to knowledge that was hidden to the rest of us. I mean, he would know about events that he could see remotely going on in another place on the earth. He could read people's souls, in a way no one else, people normally don't. He would know about things that God had revealed to him that no one else did. So you're just left asking a question, which we can't answer. Was this just his firm opinion? Because it's obviously a firm opinion, the way he puts it. Or is this something God revealed to him? We can't say. But I think it's important to realize that someone of his stature and someone of his gifts and his experience was so firm in what he believed about it.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that about St. Pio.
It's not in his biographies, that's for sure. I mean, it's recorded. There's a cardinal who wrote, kind of dug up the stuff, Cardinal Balducci. But it's in the records of his order.
Yeah, I've read a lot from him. I mean, he wrote a little bit himself, but there's a lot of secondary sources about him. And I've read a lot of works and did not come across that. So that's fascinating.
It's a particular interview, a particular dialogue with a questioner. Yeah.
It certainly makes you wonder if St. Pio took that perspective, if there's some truth to it, as you say, because of the fact that sometimes he knew things that he could not have possibly known unless God had revealed it to him.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But like Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, for instance, a lot of our listeners probably know her. Now, what she saw in her visions is private revelation, claim to it. Obviously, we can't just say everything's true. And even the church, in looking at her cause for canonization, has said specifically her writings will not be considered as part of this. because there was a a scribe who wrote it down
Right.
and may have changed things. But
Yeah.
the point is, in her visions, she saw life beyond Earth,
Hmm.
and I mean, some of it would be pretty sure, is it true, like the moon or something. So it doesn't mean that it's proof of it. But again, what it means is that someone like her, who was so devout and knew the Lord and knew her theology, I would say, if you read her writings, that she would have no problems in thinking there could be life out there. And in fact, for 50 years after the writings were published, some of the most eminent theologians of the world read it and had no objections to those statements as a matter of faith and morals, theology and morals. So I think we have to keep that in mind. Think about St. Jerome and St. Augustine. I mean, they didn't talk about extraterrestrials, but what we would today call ultra-terrestrials, the notion that there could be a non-human intelligence that even exists on Earth. And they referred in particular to the characters from Greek mythology, like centaurs and satyrs. St. Jerome gives a report, of St. Anthony in the desert meeting up with one or two. And then in case you think, he's just reporting, he doesn't believe it, but he's just reporting it. He actually says afterward, now, if you don't think these things exist, let me tell you. And then he talks about how one was captured and brought before the emperor and they preserved its body. And he's using that. He's saying, yeah, this is real.
I did not know that. That's in
Yeah.
Jerome's writings about
Yeah.
St. Anthony. Huh.
Yes. And then St. Augustine in his City of God refers to them as well, that perhaps they are aerial spirits. And by that he means that they have, our classical tradition is that angels, the ones we usually think of, have no material bodies. And so that's why they can move through space the way they do. But there had always been some who thought, well, maybe there's a different kind of angel that has ethereal bodies or aerial bodies. They have bodies, but it's of such subtle matter that it can do all kinds of things are doing. It's almost like air. And Augustine, thought not necessarily angels, but that there could be creatures like the satyrs and the centaurs might actually be creatures that are something like that. So anyway, and all that, again, that doesn't prove that it's true, but it means that someone, the father of biblical theology and one of the greatest minds and theologians in Christian history, could both say, it's in keeping with my Catholic faith that such things exist, that we're not the only intelligent embodied creatures in the universe.
Yeah. Now, how does this work with theology? How does this work, especially with something like original sin and the incarnation? I mean, if you have an intelligent being that is not human, and I mean, obviously, if it's an intelligent being, it's going to have free will. Well, if it has a free will, maybe it's exercising its free will immorally. Okay, well, does the incarnation now cover them because the incarnation has healed humanity? Does it extend to them? Can you talk about these issues that are related to theology?
Oh, yeah. The whole second part of the book is really about that. I mean, first I allow all the different historical voices to just kind of throw their ideas out. And then I try to do theology in the second half where I say, all right, here's what it seems to me. And you have to keep in mind, we're until and unless we actually encounter these things in a public way where we can communicate with them, then this is all speculation. But part of what I'm trying to show in the book is that you can have an orthodox, robust, traditional Catholic faith and accommodate these things. If the reality is out there, no problem. And whatever verses that people may have quoted in scripture are the things that may seem to push in another direction, I think have alternate interpretations, some of which people like St. Thomas Aquinas or some of the church fathers had. Not that they were thinking of ETI, but they were, for instance, when it says all, sometimes it means just the human race. So what issues are raised? Let's just say for a moment that they exist. Then all we could really talk about is possibilities, but they're fascinating possibilities. So the first possibility is, are they made in the image of God as we are? Or at least some of them. There could be, tens of thousands, millions of different races. So the thing that presses you to do, and what I love about this subject, is that again and again it presses you deeper into theology as we know it. What is the image of God? And traditionally, folks will say, and I have rational intellect and free will, but I think there's another aspect that has to be included in the Book of Wisdom. It talks about how God has made us in His immortal image, And sure enough, I think, you press theologians say, well, yeah, immortality is a part of the image of God. We are made with immortal spirits. Our souls are immortal spirits. So is it possible that some are like that, like us? Is it possible that some have rational intellect and free will, but they're not immortal? They were not made for the beatific vision. They either have a life limited to earth that can be a good life and then it's over, like with animals, or else they have an eternity, but it's kind of like the notion of limbo for for children, the natural happiness that they're just made for natural happiness. There's nothing really to rule that out. In Catholic theology, I think there's some folks who try to say that it's only that God can't make a rational intellect and free. But that was actually condemned. I want to make sure I get this right. Pope Human Generis actually says specifically condemn the idea that God can't make rational intellect without immortality. He said because that would deny the gratuity of the gift. Yeah, he can make those. And sometimes I wonder whether
that's odd, just because when we think of an intellect, how can you destroy an intellect? You would think it necessitates something that's, endures and can't be destroyed.
See, that doesn't seem obvious to me, and I know it does to some folks. And I have to wonder, we have beginning to have more and more evidence that Neanderthals on this planet would have had something of maybe primitive but rational intellect. They seem, and free will, making choices and stuff. And could it be that they're an example of that what set them apart from the first human beings was that they were not given an immortal spirit? Don't know. I mean, that gets in a whole different direction, but I'm just saying that's the kind of thing we're talking about. C.S. Lewis, in his wonderful space trilogy, he looks at that possibility on Malacandra, which is Mars, where it's fiction, and where he's writing about a race there that they know God and they live in harmony with God and that kind of thing. But when they die, that they weren't created for something more. So just as a possibility, not to say it is, but as a possibility. So that's the first branching. Okay, image of God, full image of God, or just maybe rational and free will. And then if image of God, are they fallen like we are? Or are they unfallen? You have some theologians writing about this issue who I think mistakenly, say, well, it seems to me that it's part of the evolutionary process that we end up flawed. And there's no other way for it to happen. So, of course, all the others if they're out there, are also flawed. I said, no, because that would mean that Adam and Eve had no choice, had no free will themselves and couldn't choose otherwise. So I think we have to affirm that if Adam and Eve could have remained in friendship with God, so could other races. So you've got those possibilities. Okay, then let's just take the possibility. Each time you're kind of branching off the tree. The fall, take the fallen ones. Okay, would God redeem them? I don't think you can necessarily answer that. Yes, some people would say, it would be contrary to God's nature for him not to offer them redemption. But take the angels, another non-human intelligence we know, just not, material with a material body. There's some of those that are already at the point where they will not be redeemed. There's no redemption offered to them. They fail the test. Could that be possible? Could it be possible that you have a race that's mixed this way, so that like the angels, instead of having original parents that fell and then the result was original sin for everybody that descended from them, what if like the angel was tested and either passed the test or did not, so that some of them are fallen and some of them are not? Is that a possibility? I think so. Excuse me. Is it possible if they're fallen and God wants to offer them redemption, then what are the possibilities there? Does he have to do it the way he did it on earth? Does he have to redeem them by an incarnation and all the rest? St. Thomas Aquinas, he didn't talk about ETs, but he did say, even on earth, God could have done it another way. He's God. He could find another way to do it. It's just the way he's chosen. I think by implication, that means, and I would agree, that God could find another way to do it for another race. Could he actually have an incarnation in another planet? A lot of people, I guess, got spooky thinking about it. To talk about this, I don't know how deep we can get, but as I do in the book, you have to go back to some of the early Christological controversies to understand, make sure we know what it means for our incarnation, that it does not mean, as the Nestorian heresy taught, that God, the Son, united himself to a man, Jesus of Nazareth, and then you had two persons, just united by will.
Mm-hmm.
But no, there was only one person. He was the eternal Son of God. That divine person took everything that it is to be human on himself, and he assumed that nature. So if that's the case, could he have assumed another nature of the planet? Well, again, Aquinas, not thinking of ETI, but here he said, yeah, God could have assumed more than one human nature. That's not inherently contradictory. If he had chosen to, he hasn't on Earth, but he could have done that twice. So I think, again, implication there, and I would agree with it, that that same one divine Son of God, who is one Lord, one Savior, that he could have taken on more than one nature. So you get those questions. That the other possibility is that what Jesus did, what the divine Son of God incarnate in Jesus did here, has kind of a ripple effect to other planets, so that there's kind of a cosmic Christ idea that whatever he did here will change things there. And I think that's a possibility. You have some some hints at maybe that possibility in Scripture, but all those passages I think could be interpreted otherwise. The question is, was what Christ did here? He's called the second Adam, Paul. He's undoing what was done for the race of Adam. If he's the second Adam, does that mean that that's what that did was limited here?
Right.
More importantly, the Apollinarian controversy from the Christological controversy centuries, where the heresy said that when God, the divine person, took on the human nature, he didn't take on an entire human nature, only part of it, and the word replaced the rational intellect. And the church came back and said, nope, nice idea, but no cigar.
Right.
Because the principle was what he did not assume, he did not heal. And
Right.
Joined to himself and by his power heal. That if he didn't take a human intellect, higher intellect with him, to him, and join it to him, it wasn't healed. And that has all kinds of implications, even daily. If Jesus hadn't, if there was no human intellect in Christ, then that would mean our minds aren't healed. They weren't healed. So in light of that, then you have to say, okay, if that's a principle, that sure seems to suggest that his taking on our nature might not work for the others. And you think if they're very different from us, what he joined to himself here, it was basic matter, yes, but what he joined to himself here is so different from what they are. Would it have that kind of effect, or would they not be healed? So again, it could be. I'm not denying that it could be.
Sure.
But these are all things that come up when you think about it in theological terms. You think about it in light of what we know about Christ and from the ancient controversies. And, pushes all kinds of directions. You start thinking about eschatology, the last things, the destiny. Our destiny depends on two things we already talked about. One is our spiritual status. Is a race created for the beatific vision or for something less? Because then that determines what the final destiny might be for them. And then second, it's also determined by their moral status, how they have related to God. If they've rebelled, they've got one possibility or several possibilities. So talk about eschatology depends largely on what the original creation and purpose and relationship spiritually would be, and then their moral relationship to God.
This relates to the question that I asked Jimmy Aiken, and so I'm going to ask it to you as well, since it ties into this issue of the incarnation and how far does the atoning work extend to other intelligent human beings. The question is, would you baptize an alien?
And that's, I know, this even the Pope Francis said something about that. Maybe somebody had asked him, I don't know, but I would say it's going to depend if we meet them on who they are. And that's why if I ever got a chance to meet an alien, an extraterrestrial intelligent creature, and we could communicate somehow, the first question I want to ask him is, how did everything that is come to be? Because right away that would get it, it's always existed, or we don't know, or oh, don't you know about, and they'd use their name for God, for the creator, and then go from there. and to find out if they, if they're fallen, to find out if they feel a need for a savior but haven't had one yet, that they know of. It would all depend. And but this question has actually been debated for.
Yeah,
I think it was one of the Lutherans, but anyway, he. It was because he was poking a little fun at the Catholic Church. He said, so, if they should come here, then the Catholic Church would have a dilemma about whether to baptize them, or more importantly, a dilemma about whether, if one of them was seeking ordination, could he get holy orders? And he thinks probably they would have to call an ecumenical council to make the decision.
Only if it's a male
right,
ET.
if they even have male. I mean, that's the point. And then he said, and only then they would probably just give a conditional thing, because they don't really know. And it was just fun to think that, hundreds of years ago, people were already thinking about these issues very seriously. We were talking about very serious Western thinkers,
Can we receive a sacrament from an ordained alien? Yeah, I like the way Jimmy Aiken answered the question, would you baptize Bigfoot? His I guess that's an ultra terrestrial, I think is what you called it.
Yeah, it would be a cryptid of the cryptid sort. Yeah.
Yeah. His answer was, well, if Bigfoot asked for a baptism, I would. So that's an interesting rule. Yeah.
Yeah. I still would have to say, I mean,
I think we would need to also establish it, are they capable of sin, and have they sinned?
Exactly.
But I think we would know that one pretty quickly.
Probably so. I mean, they could be extremely sinful and extremely deceptive, and just, how many people do we meet in the world where they just think like the greatest guy ever, and then you find out, oh my gosh, they're a serial killer,
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So we'd have a lot to, as I say, if we ever get to communicate with, if they're out there, we get to communicate with them, we'll have a lot of questions to answer, but we can't rule out, I think, most possibilities.
Well, on a related note of whether or not an ET would be sinful, are ETs demons? Sometimes we see this being proposed by individuals. What do you think?
Oh, a lot of the individuals. I keep running into it. And I was aware of that when I wrote the book.
Right.
I would say this. Okay, there's a certain class of lore and stories. I won't just call it lore, but stories and people with first-person testimonies claiming that they've had alien abductions, and often calling alien experiencers, but that's a little broader. And I think for sure some of those situations are almost certainly demonic. Why do I say that? For the same reason that even some secular observers who've studied those experiences have noticed the parallels with traditional accounts of demonic encounters, that they are taken against their will, that they are, it's a creature who often has light or fiery or whatever, but that they're subjected to painful, intrusive things, even sexual assault. Sometimes they're told by the things, we're going to give you the true religion. What you've got is not true. All of those things you see again and again, and I wouldn't try to put it on any particular encounter. There's something like that much with them that, yes, there's some experiences people have had that, if they're real, if they're not just hallucination or dream or whatever, probably are demonic encounters. And you even have, I haven't actually seen the documentation, but I've seen more than one person commenting on this, saying that there are some kind of faithful Christians who have had an experience like this, and at some point they said, in the name of Jesus Christ, leave me alone, and they disappeared. Boy, now if that happened, that'd be pretty clear, right? But the thing is, there's so much that has to do with alien encounter, with UFOs and sightings and stuff that don't fit the pattern at all. There's nothing malicious. There's nothing that would be like the kind of encounter that Muhammad had. I wish I could remember his name now. It's back in probably the 50s or 60s. I've seen a recording of an interview with his testimony. It was a Catholic priest who was a missionary in Papua New Guinea. And he tells, just straight, this craft comes down. The villagers are seeing it, and they you can see beings on there, and he waves and they wave back, and they take off. That doesn't sound like demonic stuff. Or on the other hand, if they actually are nuts and bolts, some of them nuts and bolts craft, demons don't need that to get around. Now, people might say they would do that still to deceive people into thinking, there would appear to be that. On the other hand, we get off into a whole new story here, but there is some evidence that the U.S. government already has in its possession or has given over into the possession of folks in the aerospace industry retrieve material from UFO crash. And if there are physical materials that have been gathered from there that are still around that they're studying, that's not an apparition. That's not a demonic apparition. That's a real thing. And demons wouldn't have needed that crap. I think maybe you think I'm crazy with that, but if you read the literature of what's going on, what's been testified to, I mean, there was a closed session hearing in Congress about kind of what we know and the status. A man named Eric Davis was making a presentation of scientists government had employed in these things. And there's a kind of a slide that got leaked from that where he says openly, he's talking about material retrieved from crashed UFOs. The government never denied that when it came out. And there have been plenty of people to say, yeah, we've got it. If that's the case, I'm not going to say absolutely no, of course I can't. But if that's the case, that sure seems to be, the kinds of encounters that don't fit the pattern for demonic at all.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. On a related note of just crashes and things like that from UFOs, I saw there was some kind of situation in the 1500s. It may have been in Germany, but there was a painting of it, I believe, where they were talking about alien beings and UFOs in the sky. Have you ever come across this?
Some of them probably are spiritually symbolic of some kind, and they're not, aliens. But there is an interesting account. I wish I could remember the year or the approximate year, but Middle Ages village, either in Germany or France, and a bunch of people disappear. And then they end up, while the rest of the village is looking, a flying ship, as they call it, comes down, and something like a ladder comes out, and the people who had been disappeared, have been missing, come down to the ground. And immediately the people say, as kind of like some folks today, oh, that's sorcery. They've been consorting with the demons. And they grabbed them, the mob grabbed them, and they were going to kill them, as witches. And it took the bishop to come out and say, no, this is not witchcraft. Now that's the person who reports this, I think, thinks that none of it happened.
Okay.
But it's sure, I know. But it's sure, that's just his opinion. There apparently were other people in the area who saw it or said that they did.
Here's what I was.
Oh, that's the one you're thinking of. Oh, over the battlefield.
Nuremberg, 1561. All this craziness in the sky. I don't know what the story is though. But that's
some of those things could, like their crosses there and that kind of stuff. But it's just some of those things that you look at and you say, yeah, it could be, but how do we know for sure? But you have the Vatican is in possession of a document from the ancient Romans where there's an account by an historian of a battle, and all the details escape me. But and they describe flying shields in the sky over the battlefield.
Is that in the book?
No, I didn't mention that because I really stayed away from the ancient alien thing. It just gets into so much craziness, and
believe me.
And also then I would have had to deal with the people who say that the wheel within a wheel in Ezekiel was a spacecraft.
Sure, Ezekiel 1, yeah.
And then people want to talk about the Nephilim,
oh boy, that's another fun topic.
And I could have. The book was already getting long, but especially
that's another book on its own,
especially with scriptural texts. I will say to like secular people who say that to me, I do get that question. Well, do you think that the wheel within the wheel in Ezekiel that it's a spacecraft? We say, okay, go back and look at the text, and what does it say it is? The person observed it, and as we report it, it's angelic. It's not that kind of stuff. It's like that. Now, what it reminds me of when people try to interpret it that way are folks who today will say to someone who has what they believe is an alien encounter or even just a sighting in the sky, they'll say, oh, that's swamp gas. Oh, that's a weather balloon. Oh, that's Venus. Why would they say that? But it's got all these characteristics that don't fit that. And what the problem is, the person who's hearing the report doesn't believe in ETI or So he squeezes their account and does it an injustice into what he believes simply because he didn't believe what they're seeing. Same kind of thing here. When you get a secular person looking at that text, Christians say, and Jews, it's angelic. He says it is, and those things exist. But if they try to do that, their attitude actually is the same attitude. It's, well, I don't believe in angels, so it's got to be something I do believe in, must be aliens, because I believe in those. In both cases, you're just doing an injustice to the report, to the witness.
This is something that I've been curious about. I've never read the book, but we have somebody asking about it. Have you ever read Thomas Horn's Exo Vaticana, Petrus Romanus, Vatican's plan for arrival of alien savior? I've been seeing this floating around. What do you think about it?
I haven't read it, but I have watched some podcasts that apparently have the same, kind of view.
Yeah.
There's so much, I used to be from an evangelical background. I love evangelical Christians and I learned so much from them. But one of the things you find in that, especially in the more fundamentalist culture, is this attempt to say that whatever's happening now somehow feeds into the end times. They've been doing it for generations. I wrote a whole book basically about this called The Rapture Trap, a Catholic View of End Times Fever. And what they're doing now is, it's every time they'll grab things from the news and say, see, this shows the world's about, and then the world doesn't end. So then they say, well, what about this? This must fit the plan. And I don't know exactly, how he sees it, but there are others who are saying, look, it's a false flag operation that the government's beginning to talk about this because what they want to do is prepare the world for Antichrist. And they want to have one world religion. And the only way they're going to unite the world is to tell them there's a threat against the entire planet. And then we'll finally come together. And the Vatican's right at the heart of it. They're going to lead it. And the Pope will take us into this one world religion. You could just get on YouTube. You'll see all kinds of videos like that. And once more, just trying to take this stuff and somehow fit it into this rapture industry and this end times industry. And it's kind of sad. I think maybe some folks at the Vatican may know more than they're telling. That's okay. But, this notion that somehow the Vatican is a part of this big one world government plot, and they're going to use some kind of hoax disclosure of ETI in order to unite the planet. That's just pretty wild. I don't see it at all. Yeah.
Sounds out there. Giga Sniper says or asks, do you think it's possible that other humans exist within the universe? If so, how different could they be from us while still remaining human and made in the image of God?
Great question. And what it makes me think of is, one of the writers who mentioned Elijah, and there were ancient traditions that when he was taken up, the different traditions about what he was taken to. He couldn't have been taken to the beatific vision because Christ's life hadn't come yet. So maybe, but he was taken up into heaven though. So maybe limbo, limbo with the fathers as it's called, or maybe some said up into the heavens, which means kind of the starry firmament we are. So you had this whole, collection of traditions, speculations is a better word, that Elijah was actually taken to another planet. And that's about the only way that I don't think that happened.
Yeah.
But to answer this question, something like that could happen. But you have had, some people speculating that if God could do that, maybe he could do something like that. They would actually be of the race of Adam and on another planet. God can do anything. He could have done it. I just don't know that we have any evidence of that.
This is interesting. What about Mary being the highest of all creation besides Christ's human nature? Does this mean that there will be other Blessed Virgin Marys if there are ETs? And how does that work?
I get into that in the book, and it depends a lot on all the things I've argued before. I save it till toward the end. The Mary will always be the mother of God. That's true. And because God is the king of the universe, Jesus Christ is the king of the universe, then she will always be the queen mother of the universe. No other way than that. The question is, if there should be other incarnations, then what would there be other mothers? Keep in mind, from what I've already said before, if there were other incarnations, you're still talking about the one divine Son of God. You're not talking about rival saviors or something. It's one divine Son of God who's taken on different natures. And and he would be Lord of the universe, and his mother would be queen in that way. The question is, would, if he were incarnate with a mother, we don't even know that. Other races might not even reproduce that way. They might clone or something.
Yeah.
So that she could be the only mother. But is it possible? I think it's possible that in his other assumed natures, if he has them, they had other mothers, but they would all be queen of the universe, in that regard, the mother, the queen mother of the king. And the Mary of humility that I know would not find that a problem, that she would be quite happy that her son was taken care of when he was incarnate in another nature. But that's just high speculation. It's
it is a little speculative.
But the main reason I talk about in the book is just to say I don't think it presents a problem. To multiple incarnations at all. And certainly, we would, even if we found out about his stories on other planets of what he did, his title or her title, his king.
What do you think about Pope Zachary's alleged condemnation of people on the moon counting against aliens existing? Many people bring this up. Have you seen this before?
Yeah, I think, though, I don't think he was condemning people on the moon. The incident I'm aware of is the Antipodes. So there was a speculation in the ancient world that if the earth is flat and we live, with our feet going down this way and our heads up this way up here, that there might be human beings, who've gotten around to the other side and are walking with their feet going the other way. That's what Antipodes means, it's like antipodes. So just a speculation that there could be human beings on the other side. What happened, both St. Augustine addressed this issue and Pope Zachary was condemning it in the belief of or the teaching of a priest, that no, they couldn't be. But then if you look at Augustine's argument, and Zachary was almost certainly following his argument, Augustine wasn't saying that there can't be other intelligent races. What he was saying is that you're saying they're human, they're on the other side. We know that this vast ocean is here. We don't have the technology to get there. And if you actually had human beings there, since they can't get from here to there, you'd be saying that they didn't descend from Adam. And the church teaches us that all humans descended from Adam. So that was his reasoning. He wasn't ruling out extraterrestrial intelligence or like that kind of thing. He was ruling out that, number one, there would be modern human beings who aren't descended from Adam, which the church has always taught. And he was doing it because of the limited technology of his day. And the limited knowledge. He had no knowledge of the land bridge that once existed between Asia and North America. Because as a matter of fact, there are Antipodes. We are them. Our feet go the other direction from the ones on the other side of the globe. So I think in cases like that, you really have to look at the context of it. And the other thing is interesting that the priest that Pope Zachary said, you've got to stop teaching this. If this is what you're teaching, he went on to be made a bishop later. So it's not as if he got thrown out of the priesthood or anything, even though there was some kind of threat that if this is all true, that he shouldn't be a priest anymore. Well, he wasn't thrown out. So maybe they finally figured out what he was saying and realized it wasn't what they thought.
This has been fascinating stuff. I could sit here all day long. Anything else that we needed to cover that we didn't cover yet from the book?
Well, I just want to emphasize, people listening, that I'm, as far as I can see, a faithful Catholic, and historical theology is my field. I got 3 degrees in it, PhD. So it's not like I'm just kind of speculating off the top of my head. But that I want to evolve that if such things exist, that what we do know for sure about them is that God created them. God loves them, as John Paul II said, and St. John Paul II. And that he is, if they need redeeming, he's their redeemer, and he is their Lord, as Lord of the universe. So none of this takes away from any of that. None of this takes away from the work that Christ did here, or the fact that in the end he reigns, even if he may have assumed multiple natures. I just want to emphasize all that. None of this, if someone can prove to me that one of these speculations really does contradict the traditional Catholic faith, I'll gladly renounce it. And for sure, if the church ever pronounces on it,
sure,
I would. retract it. But that's one other really important point before we go, that the Catholic Church has never spoken definitively about this issue.
Right.
Before the Second Vatican Council, Archbishop of Washington, D.C. Was one of those bishops who received a questionnaire survey in which the council people playing the council said, "What do you want us to talk about? What do you want us to debate in the council?" Mm-hmm. And he actually said, we have the records of it, "I think we need to make a pronouncement about extraterrestrial life." And as we all know, the council didn't do that, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking probably either they thought, well, we got more pressing, things to write about. It was the 60s after all. But I think it's because they knew that the church had never spoken on that. And that in the end, the existence at least depends on science. If we discover that they're there, then okay, let's figure out how that fits into our faith.
Yeah, they just didn't have enough to go off of. So I think that was the right decision there. Everybody get a copy of the book there in the description. Tell us where we can go, Dr. Thigpen, to find out more about you and put in a plug for anything in addition to the book, anything else that you want to make us aware of.
Oh, thanks. Well, first I'll just show you this. This is what the cover looks like. Mm-hmm. And there you go. Tanbooks.com you can go to, or you can go to your local Catholic bookstore, give them the business. And I will say I've got this is book 59. I've got number 60 is written, but it's not coming out till November. It's also published by Tan, and it's called The Life of St. Joseph as Seen by the Mystics. So fascinating book to write, to compile from various mystical visions.
I know you've been writing for a while, but I did not realize 60 books.
I've been writing for over 40 years, and I've been writing books for 35, I guess, maybe. So shouldn't be a surprise.
Impressive.
I've just been writing for a long time. So, and some of them are short. Even a few of them are children's books for children. But yep.
Still though, that's quite impressive. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this.
Well, it was my pleasure, buddy. Thank you. God bless you and all your listeners.
Thank you. You too. And everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, go and purchase a copy of the book there in the show notes. Also check me out, patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support me. See you later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.